They were good. Good morning, everybody. Sorry, I didn't quite get all the stream set up the way I wanted to, but good morning. We just finished with changing times, and I've got Chen here that was gracious enough to be willing to come on and share a little bit. I keep hearing, a lot about what's happening in China in the news with all these tariffs and different things, political things, and I know, I hear a lot about what's happening in the streets and all these different things. But I want to talk to you about what you're seeing, where your heart's at, the things you're looking into, and just an update on where you're at and what's happening.
So, speaking about the tariff war, I think one thing I really want to people's attention is like the reason China's able to make things so cheap is because they use slave labor. The whole China is like a gigantic labor camp.
Yeah.
Just think about it, even if you're not in a labor camp, even if you're like average Chinese living a normal life, they're paid very, very low. Like we are talking about the Chinese people that you do not usually meet, because most of Americans, when they meet Chinese people, they meet like Chinese tourists, right? Like they came here, they're so rich, they bought all these luxurious products, like they would buy houses with cash.
Right.
And many Americans told me like, oh, you Chinese are so rich, like you're more wealthy than Americans.
So prosperous, everything's going so well there.
Yeah. Because these are the only Chinese you can see, right? These are the upper class or elite class Chinese. They can afford to travel. But the majority of Chinese people, they do not have money to travel. Like, China does not really have a middle class. Like either you're filthy rich or you're very, very poor.
Right.
Like, when I'm talking about average Chinese that you don't see, like, let's talk about my husband's siblings in China. Like, they are farmers, like they live a normal life. Some of them work in factories, right, to make products, manufacturing. Do you know how much they pay these people? $300 per month.
Wow.
$300. The same job would cost like $3,000 at least here in the US.
Right.
But these people are only paid $300 per month. Do you know how much food a month?
That's like $1 a day, basically.
Yes.
Or something like that. Yeah.
Well,
$10
$10 a day.
$10 a day. Yeah, $10.
But do you know how much food costs?
Oh.
Pork costs like $1 to $2 per pound.
Wow.
Okay, food does not cost like 10 times less. Like they still need to pay for everything. They are not going to die from starvation, but they have to be careful how they spend. They may not be able to have enough protein every day, but they can eat a lot of starch to fill their stomach. But other than that, they cannot have much savings, like to do anything else. Of course, they cannot afford to buy any airfare to fly anywhere, right? Like if we invite them to come to the US, to see us, we pay for the airfare, we pay for everything.
Sure.
But these are the Chinese people you do not see. Usually, you do not see in the United States. And think about it: the same kind of product, it costs $3,000 to make in the US, but only $300 to pay the workers, right, per month. Who took the rest of the money? The Chinese government.
Yeah.
The Chinese government took all the money so that like they can sell these products in very, very cheap price, right, to dominate the world market. Like that's why they dominate the American market. So if you like to buy cheap products in China, then you're consuming slave labor products. When we talk about all these atrocities in China, how the Chinese government uses slave labor, it's not just those who are detained in labor camps. Of course, they're paid even less. They pay zero to these people.
Right.
But even for ordinary people, if you think about it, you only pay like 10% of American workers' salary to these people. It's also slave labor.
Yeah.
The whole China is a gigantic slave labor camp, right?
You basically have workers and your elite, right? Like you have,
Yeah. So this is the number one issue. That's why we need to apply this tariff to China, right? So that they do not dominate our market and take away our jobs. Like, the reason all the companies move their they are like manufacturing to China is because they want to use the slave labor, and Americans lost our job. And this is first the reason I support this tariff to China. And the second reason is this all this slave labor plus the Chinese government's subsidies to make super cheap products made in China, also include very, very critical products like surveillance camera, drones, and also like, electric cars.
Yeah.
And also all the parts we use in our electric grid in the US are manufactured in China. And this brought like a national security issue.
Right.
If you think about all these slave labor plus government subsidies to make super cheap surveillance camera and drones in China, right? They dominate our American market. Like, our police officers are using made in China drones, made in China cameras, a lot of made in China stuff. And even robots, I heard about it, robots like made in Unitree, like a Chinese robotic company. They dominate our market, they dominate our military base. Then they can steal all this information and deposit them in China. Because China has this national intelligence law that require all these IT companies to send the information to the Chinese cloud and be accessible to the Chinese government.
One thing that they very much are actively involved in is data, right? They want all the data, all the information. However you can get it, right? You want it all. Yeah. And they use it. They use it, right?
They use it. They monitor Americans like they can do a lot, right? A lot of these equipment, if they are made in China, intelligent equipment like intelligent cargo cranes, for example, in all the major ports, right? About 3/4 of cargo cranes nowadays are made in China. They're intelligent. They can detect what is in the cargo, where it is from, where it is going to, right? They can be accessed by the Chinese government if they're made in China. Also, they can be remotely controlled by the manufacturing company.
That's the big part, right? With
that's
the
a big part.
software
They
within
can be
it.
Yes. And think about it, like, any robotics equipment made in China, any like cargo cranes made in China during the military time, wartime, right? U.S. military base, you need to have supplies to get it in. And if you use like an intelligent cargo crane made in China, they can all of a sudden stop working. And then you're dead, right?
Yeah.
And all the like robotics equipment made in China, right? If you buy them, the robotics made in China, you use them in U.S. military, then they can be remotely controlled.
It wouldn't take too many key units to cause quite a bit of chaos.
Yes. So just think about all these national security problems, right? I think like definitely we have to block it. And the only way to block it, I think, is through tariff. Because companies or governments or any organizations in the US, they will aim for cheap price unless you have a policy. Unless you have a policy, the most simple policy is add a tariff, made them expensive again so that people will turn away from the made in China products.
Yeah, I think for the most part, we're very addicted to those cheap products, and especially the cheap electronics and all the pirated technology and stuff. It's like, oh, that's so cheap. It's good. It's not the same quality usually. And it's not helping, right?
And think about it. Like a rope can be very cheap, and then China will sell it to you so that you can kill yourself with it.
Right.
That's exactly what they're doing, right? Yeah. And we just need to be aware of all these problems. And I think like by not buying from China, I don't think it's going to be the end of the world. Like it doesn't mean like everything will be 10 times more expensive, because this is a problem with all these manufacturing companies of US, right? Yeah. When they can easily access cheap labor, they will use cheap labor. Yeah. When they cannot have access to cheap labor, they will automate their production. Yeah. They're going to design, make everything automated, use a machine instead of human to do this, because this takes money to invest of this new production line, right? They say, oh, it's so easy to find a cheap labor in China. Let's just use Chinese cheap labor. Yeah. They would not spend money to automate it and make it in the US. Think about it. Everything in China is so cheap, even plus shipping is cheaper than making in the US, right? That's ridiculous. Like definitely, if
Yeah,
you make them local,
it doesn't make sense, does it? In some ways, it's like how is it made so far away and so cheaply and still transported all that ways and gets to my
yeah,
house and yeah, it's coming a long
yeah.
way.
So this is definitely wrong. Of course, they also use the loophole, like to like not to pay for like the tax, like anything to keep the price cheap. But I think the biggest problem is that like the companies would rather use cheap labor than automate the production, right? But when they cannot access cheap labor anymore, they will consider the possibility to make it in the U.S. and automate it so that
Yeah.
American workers will not do the very low paid job. They would be able to monitor the automated production line in the US. This is something I really look forward to. Like, of
Right.
course, companies, I think they would still look for cheap labor. They would try to make
Yeah.
it in
Yeah, of
Vietnam
course.
or India. Yeah. But
Yeah.
I think eventually, if they want to solve this problem and also be environmentally friendly, let's
Right.
take it like we say, like buy local, right?
Yeah.
Because if you make them local, the shipping cost,
Right.
is much lower,
Yeah,
and also
the
you bring
carbon
jobs.
footprint is less. You know, there's
Yes, let's
less
say that
fuel. Yeah.
carbon footprint.
Yes.
Like Democrats should
Yes.
love to hear that. Yeah, right. So, yeah, I feel like it's not going to be as bad as some of the mainstream media reported to say, oh, everything will be expensive, Americans will protest. I don't
Yeah,
think so.
well, there's always a transition time with anything, and I
Yeah,
love the what you're talking about with the automation and the changes. I mean, this has happened throughout history with industrialization, and you look at back then, it was now they're getting a little higher pay, but they're learning how to work on these machines and they're learning how to set up this, textile thing. Now all the people that were sewing lost their jobs because but now they need people to work on the machines. They need people to distribute. They're able to sell more. Now they're putting in department stores and it changes and it's really cool because you think about now with modern technology, they actually can do things cleanly. They really can. They can do things efficiently. Automation, things like the ports. I mean, just think of how much better it is to have ports and places of commerce that can run smoothly with the automation and less human error with those types of things. And one of the things that we're looking at with the communist system, it's not the people. We're looking at these different systems and there's systems that work well and there's systems that don't.
yeah,
And I love that buy local. I think you mentioned even that where we work in our community with each other, right? We work together, we shop together, we live together. I think having more of that's really important. A focus on family, community, neighbors, all of those things. This storm that came through is great because it gives people a chance to go help their neighbors, check on neighbors, deal with the neighbors' trees that fall or my tree falling on my neighbors, all those things. So those things are wonderful.
yeah. And once you have more jobs, like you can solve a lot of problems in the community, right? Like
Right.
when people have a job, they're less likely to become homeless. They're less likely to have mental illness. Like,
Yeah.
a lot of problems
Yeah.
can be solved.
There's a
They're less likely to get,
lot of worth that comes from it. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I do look forward to it. And I believe that this tariff war, it brought a lot more impact to China than to the US. I
Mhm.
heard like China already secretly dropped like 25% of the products from their
Right.
tariffs they applied. Because if you think about what they buy in the US, like they buy like a aircraft parts from Boeing.
Yeah.
Are you going to say you're not going to buy that anymore? Are you going to fly again? So
Mm,
they have to buy this because these are the essential stuff they're buying from the United States
right.
that cannot be replaced by other countries' products. Like you can, if you have a Boeing aircraft, like you're not going to buy it from parts from other companies,
Yeah.
unlikely, right? And
Yeah.
also all these
I, I,
chips,
I wouldn't
essential.
suggest going to North Korea for your parts. It's not the best place.
Yeah, yeah. So and also many money of like chips for their electronics, like they rely on this, so they will have to buy from the United States because what we supply to China are essential, But what Americans buy from China are non-essential, like
Yeah.
clothes, umbrellas.
Yeah.
You can buy them from any other country. It's very easy to buy them, and they're eager to sell them to us, right? They're eager, like, to
Yeah.
replace China to make money, and also like we can make them locally. It's not so hard to make them in the United States. And I also feel like many of the mainstream media reports nowadays, like I think they have some very very strange, like professors or politicians about, oh, you
Yeah.
have to partner with China, you have to partner with such a big country, right?
Right.
I mean, they are either stupid or they're bought out, because
Right.
nobody ever said you need to partner with Soviet Union. Like
Right.
30
Yeah.
years ago, no one would say that you must
Yeah.
partner with Soviet Union, such a big
Yeah.
country. You need to
Yeah.
do business with them. Anyone saying that, they would think you're crazy. But
Right.
nowadays, people would say that about China,
Yeah,
because
it
you're
really is a different approach, isn't it? I hadn't thought about that. I mean, it's totally different, right?
yeah,
And yet, like politically and stuff, and it's the same. So that just shows that influence that
yeah,
they,
the influence they had in academia, right? Like
yeah,
all these, these like professionals, like journalists, or like politicians, or like economics,
and they're
study like
very,
people,
it's
like,
very smart. It's very well done.
yeah,
Very
yeah,
crafty, and that's what And again, for me, there's spiritual forces that are leading this. This is just going against everything that's God, everything that's natural. You can see because of how it affects the people, right? It destroys
yeah,
families, it destroys children, it destroys all these things, and that it's a spiritual force. And unfortunately, there are some systems that man buy into that are definitely more aligned with those negative spiritual forces than what's positive. I am excited about the time we live in, right? Because I think people can see better now what's really going on if they open their eyes. I know there's really, like, the mainstream news and stuff really doesn't give you a good picture, but if they open their eyes and pay attention, they can really see what's going on. You look and see who some people are supporting as an issue in our country. People that are like wife beaters and human traffickers, and they're like defending them as American citizens or something. It's like, what is going on with what people are doing? But I think one of the things we see is there's a lot of deception and then a lot of corruption, and a lot of people are willing to sell out for very little money, really. If you think
yeah.
about what you're
They,
getting for,
they're brainwashed. They're
yeah,
brainwashed. I mean, like, they're brainwashed. Even the logic changed.
yeah,
They changed it into like the Communist Party's logic, right? Like
yeah,
they don't think properly. I was saying, they
right.
lost like common sense.
Yeah. Well, and you experienced that, right? You had that yourself, where it took a while
Yeah.
to realize, wait, some of these things I've learned, some of these things I've heard. That's what's happening in our country, right? There's a lot of people that are brainwashed, and they're saying things, they're presenting things, and it's like they really don't have the right facts. It's a delusion, deception, and believing just falseness. That's why I love what you're doing. Just sharing truth, right? Sharing what
Yes.
you know, what you see.
Yeah, and you have to keep reminding them about all these truths, because oftentimes these people are often very well educated.
Yes, yes,
I'm surprised to find many of them are very well educated. They're college professors. They also teach this ridiculous logic to their students.
yeah,
I mean, I feel very sad about it. Even if you tell them about the truth about the whole China is slave labor, they would say, "Oh yeah, that's right," and then they would turn back. But still,
but it's not, yeah, it's not that bad. There's some, or I heard something about. I know, yeah, it's like, I don't know, putting it in the back of the mind, or just
yeah.
covering it over. Yeah,
I think something's wrong with the logic. The
yeah,
logic.
logic.
Yeah, like they would deliberately ignore, or like have a double standard,
Yeah,
right? Like, they would say, oh, it's terrible to have this in the US, but it's okay to
yeah,
have slave labor in another country and we buy their products.
yeah,
Or it's okay to have like environmental pollution in another country
yeah,
as long as we are clean here. But
Yeah.
the whole Earth, everything is a cycle, right? Like,
Pretty-
if you pollute water, eventually the pollution comes here. If you pollute
that,
the air also comes here eventually, right?
yeah, we're drinking the same water that dinosaurs did. It keeps getting
I know.
recycled. Yeah,
Yeah, or we should not drill oil in our land, but we should drill oil in another land, right?
yeah,
Like use their resources. I mean, this is just double standard. And that's exactly communism
yeah,
in the Western society. That is communism.
yeah,
Communism is not only in China; they're also in the U.S. everywhere by like changing your logic, like to make
yeah.
you think in their way.
Yeah, I think about that with when you were as a scientist and you were looking at what was happening with COVID and how there was so many your peers or those in the field that are obviously educated, they know science and yet weren't embracing science in many areas and going a different way.
Yeah, that's very sad, but I still see the hope because there
Yeah,
are still people like us. I think it requires adjustment to this system to make real scientists, you
yeah,
know, get into the system because now this system you actually kick the real scientists out. Like
yeah,
you keep political people there. Like
yeah, yeah,
you cannot pursue truth anymore.
right.
So I think eventually you need the right policy to adjust it. And I think President Trump is doing the right thing.
Yeah, yeah. It's going to be interesting to see how it all flushes out around the world. There's one thing I do like about you can see with Trump is that he really does care about people. Even though he may be fighting governments and systems in different places, I think in all the different countries, he cares about the people of the country. He really does want to see good for all people. He's very generous that way. He's not one of these ideologues or just following some thought process that he thinks has to be done. He's very pragmatic and saying, how can we help people? How can we do something? Doesn't necessarily always make the right choices or whatever, but I think he really does care about people, which is interesting to see in a president. I don't know that I've seen that real strong anytime recently, so it's neat to see.
Yeah, my only concern and something very interesting I've been thinking about is TikTok. Right?
Yeah,
Like President Trump's like why he's keeping TikTok.
yeah, yeah,
That's also
because
something I've
yeah.
been thinking for a long time because TikTok definitely is a spyware.
Oh,
It is a
definitely. Yeah,
spyware.
there's no
Like
doubt.
it's
Right.
made in China,
Yeah.
and once you install TikTok on your phone, it takes so much information that it can make a
Yeah.
replica of your whole phone. This
Right.
is bizarre because no other app in the US would make this kind of app. Like you
No.
don't need everything in your phone to install app,
No.
but TikTok will take everything, including all the passwords you installed on your
Wow.
clipboard for every account you ever opened
Yeah.
on your phone. So once they have your TikTok installed, they can monitor what you speak, what you write, like they can take everything from your phone, right? And many people think like this is definitely like typical like a virus or spyware, typical characters of a virus.
Mhm.
And nowadays like over 50% of Americans use this
Yeah.
app.
A lot.
They take information of over 50% of Americans, including your facial
Right.
recognition, like it can take your biological feature.
Oh
And
yeah.
that's very, very dangerous because if
Right.
they take your password, right, you can change your password, but you
Right.
cannot change your face
Yeah.
unless you have a plastic
Yeah.
surgery, right? And once they have your biological feature, then they can open everything in the future, like
Yes.
from you, right? Like that can you use facial recognition. So this is also a huge concern. And another concern is like how they spread propaganda through this
Right.
TikTok, right? People rely
Yeah.
on TikTok to
It's
get
very
news, to see the
powerful,
word.
right? It's very powerful because it not only do they collect that information, but they also know how to steer people to um, uh, guide them down a path and show them things that they want to show them,
Yeah.
thinking that the individual is doing. I mean, it's at the point now where they'll have something sitting in a warehouse ready to ship to your house because they know ahead of time you're going to order it because they are going to tell you to order it. I mean,
Yeah.
that's because they studied the the eyes, the facial, all those kind of things. Even in that, like with the monitoring, they know even
Yeah, every
kind of what
you know,
people are thinking in the
yeah.
sense. And
If you chat with your friend, like say, "Oh, I need a new umbrella,"
yeah,
immediately you see an umbrella
yeah,
advertisement, right? Stuff
yeah,
like that.
yeah,
And I mean, I'm very concerned about the danger of TikTok, and I have been wondering why President Trump would not
yeah,
ban it immediately, because I know very well, like the Chinese government will not sell it. They already formed a law that you cannot sell TikTok, right?
right.
Of course, that's a part of the negotiation. Like you never know. Maybe, maybe they will sell it. But I think from the Chinese government's perspective, they would rather kill TikTok than
Yeah,
sell it.
yeah.
Because if you ban TikTok, right, like, the Chinese government can make another Chinese app
Oh yeah,
popular
yeah.
and dominate the market, right? Like
Uh,
Red Note, right? During
yeah,
the couple of
I'm
weeks
sure they
when
got
TikTok,
several they're working on and launching all the time. I
yeah,
would imagine.
yeah,
Yeah,
they can launch another app and make it popular to replace TikTok.
yeah,
But if they indeed sell TikTok, right, and then Americans will continue to use the new TikTok, they will not use another Chinese app. So I think maybe that's the reason the Chinese government will never sell it, and maybe that's the reason
yeah.
President Trump
I know it was kind of
wants to
strange because it
make the
seemed like
deal.
he was very much against it at first, and then kind of backpedaled a little bit, and those things. Of course, yeah, we don't know all those inner workings, but it is definitely a concerning one because. Yeah, they were talking about just recently that the average attention span is 8 seconds now. 8 seconds. A goldfish is 9 seconds, so we're almost as good as a goldfish, right?
That's
It's like,
terrible.
isn't that?
Yeah,
It is. I mean, it's really bad.
yeah,
I was talking to my daughter about it. She's like 22 or whatever, and she's like, "Yeah, I had to just stop." Me and my friends were like, "We have to stop this because it that little." Thing and all of a sudden you're watching all these little videos and all this little stuff and they're tracking what you like and they're feeding you down this path and all of a sudden you burned up like an hour doing nothing. And they're like, "Man, if I'm going to sit and watch something, I could watch some informational video or something. I could spend that time doing something worthwhile. I don't know, but
yeah.
that's not." So she was stopping with that stuff. But it's I am amazed at some of the politicians that are kind of back and forth on it now. They're like, "Well, it's not, but it works okay for, promoting things," and it's just, I don't know. It's interesting times, definitely.
Yeah, I would say there are zillion different software that can easily replace TikTok.
Oh yeah.
India banned TikTok overnight. That was like how many years ago? I forgot. Quite a few,
Right,
like
right, yeah,
at
yeah,
least 3 or 4 years ago. They banned TikTok overnight.
yeah.
Overnight, it stopped working. And then, Indians, the best programmers, like
Oh
they
yeah,
immediately have
oh
their
yeah.
native, software to replace TikTok. Everything has been fine, right? And how come it's so hard in the United States to ban TikTok? So I
Right,
think that's a huge problem. And I would say this is the only thing I don't quite get from President Trump
right.
about this. Yeah.
Yep, that makes sense. So, what are you working on now? How are things for you?
I have been, in the past 20 years, I have been spending most of the time raising awareness of the forced organ harvesting in China. And I think I spoke about that with
Yeah,
Lynn Morris
yeah,
at another time. And yet, yesterday, oh no, the day before yesterday, Monday, the U.S. Congress unanimously passed a bill against forced organ harvesting. It's HR 1540, called like Falun Gong Protection Act. So this is an act to sanction the Chinese individuals who are involved in forced organ harvesting. So I
okay.
think that's a very important move. Like I'm glad like it
Yeah,
passed in the U.S. Congress, and it's only like a May, right? So we need to
right.
get it passed in
Yeah,
Senate, and then let President Trump sign it into the law.
that's a
So
big step, though, huh? That's a
I know.
long time coming, huh?
I know, but I mean, last session of Congress, we also had something similar passed, but it
Yeah,
never went through the Senate.
didn't go through, did it? Yeah,
The Senate didn't vote. I think this is the biggest thing. I think we really need to bring this to the attention of our politicians, because when you have this tariff war and everything, people wonder why. Why do you pick China out? Like, why is China different from other countries like Canada or Europe, right? And why do you have to pick China? And we have to tell people the human rights atrocities in China and why this regime is dangerous and why we should not let this regime's product to dominate our market. So when you think about the tariff war and everything, I think the most important message here is that China has a huge human rights problems. And this is a very, very dangerous regime. It's a mafia system. And we should not let them dominate. I think Americans are very lack of awareness of the human rights abuses in China, how bad situation there is. Like Uyghurs, they may know a little bit. Falun Gong probably zero.
Yeah, Falun Gong I don't think is anything that resonates. The Uyghurs is the one that you would hear more of. And you think even with that bill that just passed, right? There's no big news about nothing. It's all about the tariffs and stuff. And what you're sharing is so important. I mean, this is where the issue is, right? It's the human abuse, the human rights that aren't being, I do believe that we are all endued by our Creator with rights of life and freedom and be able to own property and so that's so important to know that this is happening, right? These individuals there are individuals having their organs harvested. There are individuals that are being killed or dying for no good reason. Abuse, the slavery, all of that. It's not right. And that tariff thing is just one piece of the puzzle, right?
I think China is not doing this just yesterday. Like, it has been a long history. Right. I mean, throughout the history of the Communist Party, they have been killing people. The Communist Party killed over 80 million Chinese in the past century, like including 40 million during the Great Famine in the 50s, right? They took food from everyone, said, oh, we're going to distribute them equally. And they did not. Like, they sold a lot of these harvests to exchange for weapon, right? Everything. And so many Chinese people died from starvation, but the media were not allowed to report anything.
Right. Yeah, that's a crazy number, right? 80 million, right? Yeah.
In like 1 century. And they had the Cultural Revolution in the 60s and 70s. The Communist Party killed over 2 million intellectuals because they think educated people can criticize the government. Right. So they killed many, many intellectuals. And then the Tiananmen massacre, you all know the Tiananmen story. And then the Falun Gong. This is a peaceful meditation practice based on traditional Chinese value, right? People meditate. They follow the principle of truthfulness, compassion, tolerance for better, to be a better person. But the Communist Party thinks this meditation, this principle is independent thinking, right? They think like once you have independent thinking, you can criticize the government. They can't brainwash you anymore. They can control religion in China easily by controlling their churches or temples. Christians in China, they have a different version of Bible, right? The Communist Party altered the Bible. And then they say, oh, this is your new Bible. It's still a Bible. And the whole China.
Government authorized.
Yes, it's a government authorized the Bible. And they would let Communist Party members to lead the churches, right? We call them a government church in China. And all these Bibles, there's only one company in China. They print tens of millions of Bibles every year. They sold them to China. They also sold them to the U.S. to infiltrate into our church system. They say, oh, it's just another version of Bible. And then they sell many to the U.S. because they're cheap, right? You want to buy a cheap Bible. I hope the tariff will prevent American churches from buying Chinese Bible. If you can print a Bible in China, what kind of Bible is this, right? You just can't go for cheap price. I really hope Trump can add 300% tariff to Bibles made in China. Right? Maybe we should suggest that, 145% of everything else, but 300.
300 at least.
That's the worst you can imagine.
1,000%.
Yeah, that's the worst. Wow. And all of this, they can control religion like that, but Falun Gong itself is individual practice.
Yeah.
You can meditate at home by yourself.
And
You don't need to go to
tell
church.
me the principles again of
It's called truthfulness, compassion, tolerance. This is the
truthfulness,
principle.
compassion, and tolerance. That's
Yes,
it seems like that's hard to argue with. I mean,
I know.
you're going to be truthful, you're going to be compassionate to others, and you're going to be tolerant of others. I mean, that seems pretty basic right there, doesn't it?
Yeah. And the Communist Party, they don't like that. They don't want you to be truthful. They
Mm.
want to turn you into a propaganda easily. They want you to be easily brainwashed by propaganda, right?
Yeah,
If
because
you
it's
if you
not the
stick to
truth.
truthfulness,
It's
they
what
don't want you
it's what the
to follow
government
truth.
says. It's not what the truth is. It's what the government
Yes,
said, right?
yes. They want to believe in everything the government teach you, right? They don't want you to follow compassion, right?
Yeah,
They want you to follow violence. They don't want
yeah,
you tolerance. They
yeah,
want you to kill others,
yeah.
and like persecute others once you join the party, right? And they do not. The Communist Party do not like this principle, and they also know like they have no way to change Falun Gong because they cannot. There's no church or Bible
Right. Yeah. It's
they can distort. So that's why they started this massive persecution in 1999, put millions of people in prison. So that's very, very sad news we
yeah.
hear from China, but our mainstream media have not report enough of
No.
this.
No, it's really sad that, but I am thankful that we have opportunities like this to be able to share things, and there's more and more of these opportunities that are coming up, and I think people more and more looking to those things where they're going, wait a minute, I'm not getting the right information from the mainstream media. It's just not. It's not being led down the right path. They're not giving me the information. So I'm really glad for all the alternative media that's out there that people could go
Yeah.
to. So,
And speaking about the mainstream media, the Chinese government has business ties with over 30 mainstream medias around the world. That include like the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, Los Angeles Times, all the mainstream media you can name, right? And like the Chinese government would pay them to run advertisement. Before 2020, Wall Street Journal received over $6 million from China to run advertisement. And New York Times and Washington Post also received a significant amount of money from China. So all of these business ties like definitely restricted this mainstream media from reporting news in a truthful way, right? They don't
right.
want to lose their clients.
Yeah,
They don't
they're
want to lose their
not
money.
really just buying advertising, right? They're
Yeah,
buying influence,
they're buying
buying
influence.
yeah.
Okay.
And when you have lots of money, you can buy a lot of influence.
And think about how could they get lots of money?
Yeah,
That's through the trade,
yeah,
through all this slave labor that American companies, hired, right? Like
yeah,
the work, their salary was taken by the Chinese government, right?
yeah,
That's how they got the money to buy our media.
yep,
See, so all of these are connected. When you think about tariff, it affects so much, right? Like if you can stop letting China to get money, they will have less influence on American media, on Hollywood, and on our education system, our
right.
professors, right? Like they have much less influence on us.
And the other side of it too, less money to be threatening neighbors and expanding military powers and things with, you know, not in a defensive way, right? That's not the approach they're taking.
Yeah, that's true. Like all this transnational suppression in the US, right? Like you probably know, like China runs many, many agents in the United States.
Yeah.
Like, just December 2024, like 5 months ago, FBI charged a Chinese guy in Los Angeles for being a spy, for working for the Chinese government. Do you know what this guy does? Like his name is Mike Sun, lives in Acadia. He's the campaign manager of the Acadia Councilwoman Eileen Wang. So
Wow.
basically, FBI found that this is a spy.
Yeah.
Like this is a Chinese spy. They caught him because he has been regularly visiting China, to meet his supervisors and
Right.
getting money from China to work here. And in the criminal report, right? They can like this. It's not he's just not one spy. This spy group of spy. They contain at least 6 or 7 members. And through like basically FBI followed their phone conversation or WeChat conversation, and they said Eileen Wang is a core member of their team, and their most successful case is getting her elected because she's a core member of this agent group, and she got into the position of councilwoman in a city, right? And they said like through her they are going to shape the policy of the United States, and through her she can approach other elected officials in the U.S. because it's a network, right?
Yeah.
And they even get money from China to go to all these dinners and conferences of political, campaigns and everything, right? To meet influential American politicians, and they get money, they get funding to do that. Yeah. They also apply for funding to form performing arts groups to promote communism in the U.S. They probably want to compete with Shen Yun, right? Some way.
Sure.
Because Shen Yun is a dance company formed by Falun Gong, and Shen Yun is 100% made in USA because it's based in New York, and they recruit talented American teenagers, as dancers and musicians. They are very, very talented.
Yeah.
And they would get trained in New York.
It's amazing. The stuff they do is just incredible.
Yeah, the dancers, they can fly in the air.
Oh, man, yeah.
They're like a professional gymnasts,
yes.
right? And they want to target Shen Yun. They probably cannot compete with Shen Yun on the talent and everything, but they can defame Shen Yun, right? When Shen Yun goes to tours, right, these CCP agents, they would call theaters and for bomb threats, right? They would say, we're going to bomb your theater if you don't cancel the Shen Yun show. When Shen Yun came to Los Angeles in the past 2 months, we had at least 2 theaters in Southern California receive the bomb threats. And, the show continued, went on, because the police found it was, was like a false alarm, they checked the theater, it was okay. And Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C. also received the bomb threat. So these are all CCP agents, they arranged this. They also filed lawsuits against Shen Yun. Because these are teenagers, performing dance, professional gymnasts, they filed lawsuits against Shen Yun. They said Shen Yun used child labor. Okay, child labor. Think about a professional gymnast is probably only 15, right? Professional gymnasts would get sponsorship and everything, and nobody would say they're child labor. They would be in universities, right? Nobody would say they're child labor. And now they can file lawsuits against Shen Yun, say Shen Yun used child labor because of the dancers are underage. But you can't be a good dancer after you're too old, right? Yeah. So, and they would damage the reputation of Shen Yun, and also let mainstream media report all this, say, Shen Yun used child labor, it's a bad. They don't pay dancers. Right. But the reality is all these dancers and musicians in Shen Yun, they get a full scholarship. Yep. Full scholarship means tuitions are all covered. Room and boards are covered. And when they travel, all the travel expenses are covered. Everything. They even have stipend when they tour. They tour 3 months.
It's a coveted position. I mean, it's something you have to work to get. Yeah.
It's worth $100,000, at least if you think about all this money together. How much do you pay if you go to college, right? My daughter went to college. If you add all the tuition and everything together, it's $80K or $100K, right?
Easy.
And these are all covered. Shen Yun. So Shen Yun is paying them very, very well by giving them, this full package of sponsorship. And also the dancers, they perform, right? The ticket proceeds from all these ticket sales go to support the Shen Yun's dancers, because this is a performing arts group and they cannot rely on donation, because this is a dissident group of Falun Gong and they are under forced organ harvesting in China. And so many companies in the US want to do business in China, use slave labor, right? They will not donate to Shen Yun. Individuals, they will not donate to Shen Yun because this is a dissident group. So Shen Yun, they have tours all over the world. They would raise money from the ticket sale to support their dancers and musicians. And that make it a sustainable way to run this education system. They have a high school and a college in New York. They can educate their dancers, musicians, give them full scholarship at the same time. They through performance, they can cover all these full
I think it's
scholarships.
fascinating that the charge that they're going to put against them is, child labor. And that just shows the way the enemy does things, these dark spiritual forces, right? They blame others for what they're doing. The very things they
Exactly.
do, they say,
Exactly.
you're doing that. And we see that in America a lot. And it's like, you're doing this, you're doing that. And it's like, wait, no, you're the one that's doing it. We're
Yes.
against that.
Just think about the New York Times. How ridiculous is New York Times, right? New York Times has like a dozen articles, like they say, folks report about how shaming used child labor, but they denied China's organ harvesting.
Oh,
They denied China's, or they just interviewed some professors, say, oh, there's no evidence about it. And the U.S. Congress just passed this bill, right?
right.
And New York Times just pretended they don't know anything. They just don't know anything.
It's
Oh,
almost
they pretend.
criminal, really.
I definitely think it's so wrong. It's so wrong. What they're doing is so wrong. They completely sided with a totalitarian regime to persecute the Chinese people and help this regime to defame an American performing arts company.
It's so sad, and it really brings up the need, I think, for all of us to be aware of where we're getting our information from, right? To do some due diligence, especially when it comes to what's happening in the world, and it's important for us to know. We're all world citizens in some way, and if we're buying stuff from a place that has slave labor, well, we're supporting it. So important for us to really be awake, right? And to pay attention now more than ever.
Yeah. And speaking about media that I can trust, I would highly recommend the Epoch Times.
Yeah.
The Epoch Times is started by Falun Gong practitioners as a Chinese newspaper in 2001. And because people realize that in the US, very few media would report the truth about China because of all these business ties. That's how they started the Epoch Times as an independent media for uncensored news about China. They started as a Chinese newspaper, and then they also had English version, and now the English Epoch Times is fourth largest media in the United States, print media. And this is the media that's started by Chinese dissidents with a mission to expose the lies of the CCP. And I trust Epoch Times will never compromise to the Communist Party's money and power. So this is a reliable source you can get news from. And I think, I just read an article on Epoch Times this morning about the forced organ harvesting the bill passed the Congress. And so far, this is the only media I saw report about this bill passed against organ harvesting. And that's just one of the evidence to show
I
you.
think I heard one little
for.
blurb maybe on the radio, or just a passing kind of, where they might have mentioned it, maybe. But yeah, there's no news on it. And I looked at Epoch Times after we talked last time. It's wonderful. The information that's there is really good. Yeah.
And also make sure you subscribe because Epoch Times rely on subscription to continue, right? You can imagine, this is one of the newspapers that very few big company would like to run advertise or financially support. So they rely on subscription.
Much better.
To continue their news report. So if
you don't want a big donor that you're beholden to. It's better to be beholden to the people you're sharing the information with and share the right information. Yeah.
Yes, definitely.
I love
and
that.
I think comparing to many other conservative media, like Epoch Times is very, very good because it's quite, I would say, it's a very solid newspaper because it started by Falun Gong practitioners. So they still stick to the principle of truth.
Still in the truth, right? And truth and compassion.
I think truth and compassion. I think the truth is very important, right? I don't think one should exaggerate, just because for the right reason, right? Many liberals say, oh, if you have a good reason, you can lie, you can exaggerate. I would say never, ever do that because you're going to lose your credibility. And it's just simply wrong if you cannot report it truthfully. And Epoch Times has been the sticking to the principle of truth and tradition, which I really
Yeah.
like. I think this is a kind of value Americans should follow
Yes.
for a better future.
Yeah, it's so important. We're at definitely a crossroads in our country. Where it's time that we've been going the wrong direction, and there's a lot of change, and I think a lot of positive changes in direction. But it's going to take individuals, really in our own homes, in our own neighborhoods, in our own communities, making a difference, paying attention to local elections. The whether it's the dog catcher or the city council. I mean that we like where I'm at, generally speaking, the population's very conservative, but we have a lot of leaders that aren't so much. Maybe they are in name, but not so much in action. And, I know, time to vote and you got 15% of the people turn out or something, 20%. It's like, we need to be much more serious on paying attention, because money can buy elections. And we've seen it in Missouri. They passed Amendment 3 on abortion, and it was just a horrible amendment. And it was all done through money. It was it bypassed the legislature, just a mess. But all this outside money came in, millions of dollars, and they had ads, and the ads sounded good, and there were a lot of people voted for it, thinking they were voting for one thing when it was the actual opposite of what they thought they were voting for. If they had known, they wouldn't have voted for it. And so now it's just a mess. But it was that money that came in. So it's so important for us to pay attention, to know, to talk to each other about, some of these leaders around us. I don't know all the names of all the city council and stuff. I probably should, right? I should know who's leading the town I'm in and stuff, and be more involved. So I think that's so important for all of us to pay attention to, in whatever area we're at, whatever.
Definitely, I agree. Like when people make policy, oftentimes they may have good intention.
Yeah.
I think people generally have good intention, but they do not see the loopholes of this policy, right? They don't see like how people can use this loophole to do something really bad.
Right.
And that's why we always need people to fill these loopholes. Like you need to bring this to their awareness. And I totally agree with you. Like money can do a lot, but money cannot buy truth.
Right.
And many people, just after they heard the information that I share through podcast or public speaking, they will say, "Oh, you're a whistleblower." I say, "I'm not a whistleblower. I want to be a whistle distributor.
Yeah.
I want to distribute all this information to everyone so that everyone would blow the whistle."
Yeah.
And that's what you are also doing, right?
Yeah.
By listening to this podcast, you get a lot of information that you don't get from mainstream media. And now you can be a whistleblower. Anyone sitting in front of the computer can be a whistleblower. You can tell your neighbors, you can tell your friends, your children, your family about what you learned today about China, about something different from the mainstream media. You can think by yourself and you can talk. And don't underestimate the power of one person. Think about it. If you tell 10 person, right, and these 10 people will tell another 10 people, and quickly word spread out. Because people, when they see, they can think independently.
Yes.
They really have this critical thinking. They will know what's right and what's wrong, and eventually that will influence our policy makers.
Yeah. Amen. Well, I think we're done. I don't know. You got anything you want to share before we sign off and everything? And again, I want to really thank you for taking this time. I'm going to be starting some new show on Wednesday after Lynn. But I had a little time today, and I thought, man, with everything with happening there in China, I think I was thinking it was getting lost in the noise, the reality of the things you're talking about. Some of these deeper issues. Instead of people worrying about whether they can get their cheap products they've been buying, and maybe think about some of these deeper issues of what's happening. Because it's not about politics; it's about humanity. It's about people. It's about how they're being treated, and wanting to blow that whistle and let people know, hey, this isn't right. Let's respect life. Let's treat people properly. Let's find a way to get this right. Because we've gotten a lot wrong.
So my final words to the audience is please read the Epoch Times and follow the Epoch Times for any news about China, because I believe Epoch Times is the one of the very few media that will never compromise to the CCP's influence. And also, when Shen comes back to your city next year, I think they finished the tour already.
Yeah.
Make sure you watch this 100% made in USA show. This is a show for China before communism, and this is a show the CCP does not want you to watch. So these are my final words.
I'm really glad to know that, because I've been to that before here when they're here, but it's been a year or two. So yeah, I definitely need to make sure I go at least once a year for sure. Whenever. Yeah, definitely. And the Epoch Times, what's the website? Is it .com or dot?
Yeah, .com. The
.com.
EpochTimes.com.
Yeah, I was trying to remember. I should have pulled it up ahead of time, but yeah, Epoch Times.
Yeah, the Epoch Times.
The
Epoch Times.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, good. All right. Well, thank you everybody for tuning in. Thank you again, Win, for being here and just being ready to share. And we'll keep passing out them whistles and make some noise and hopefully protect some people, help some people. And I look forward to testimonies of individuals that are able to come out of some things and have a new life and new hope. And for everybody going through this harder times right now, know that there's a lot of people that care. There really are. There are people that are working on your behalf. Do what you can. Let's pray together. Let's work together. Let's believe together for something more than what we have right now in our world. There's plenty of places of darkness. Let's shine that light, blow that whistle, and just help others. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Ann. Signing out.